History in the state of Maine. I'm very pleased to report that the state of Maine has been a partner with 19 other states and the District of Columbia and the Federal Department of Justice in litigating and negotiating this large settlement. The total settlement nationally, as you probably know, is $1.375 billion. Half of that goes to the federal government, and half has been divided among the 19 states and the District of Columbia, who actively participated all along the way in this lawsuit against Standard & Poor's. Our lawsuit in state court alleged that Standard & Poor's violated Maine's Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act by inflating their ratings for certain complex products, including residential mortgage-backed securities. That conduct occurred through late 2000 through 2007, 2008, and contributed greatly to the demise of the housing market in Maine and elsewhere across the country. It contributed to the loss of jobs here in Maine, and the loss of houses and the foreclosure crisis that occurred here in Maine and elsewhere. The remnants of which we are still dealing with, the after effects of which we are still dealing with all across this state. As you remember, housing values went up and up and up in many parts of the state, and then they crashed. One of the reasons for that was Standard & Poor's inflating the ratings, making them AAA ratings for certain products, including so-called residential mortgage-backed securities and credit default options. The reason they did that wasn't because those were great investments, but because they were getting fees, essentially kickbacks, from the investment banks that own those products. So while Standard & Poor's was out there saying, we are an institution of great integrity and our ratings are worth going to the bank on, what they were in fact doing, as we alleged across the country, was getting fees back for inflating those ratings. And in reliance on those ratings, many investors bought residential mortgage-backed securities, which then pushed up the residential mortgage market. It encouraged people to write mortgages that were not good mortgages. And so you saw a large increase in home equity loans and mortgages for homes where they were not credit-worthy instruments. So that's the gist of the lawsuit. Out of the almost $1.4 billion, Maine will be receiving sometime this spring a sum of $21.5 million, and that money is purposed primarily to go for consumer protection and education efforts. We will obviously be interested in helping with foreclosure relief and remediating the effects of the recession of 2008, which this institution, Standard & Poor's, we have alleged contributed to in a large manner. So I want to emphasize that holding this Wall Street entity accountable was a joint effort, obviously, between 19 other states and the District of Columbia and the federal government. But it sends a message to Wall Street that we will not tolerate acts that deceive investors and that devastate our economy. And I will continue to work to promote transparency and to protect the integrity of our financial system. The settlement shows that the attorneys general are willing to work together with the federal government and to pursue any entity that violates the public trust and that stacks the deck against consumers and homeowners, such as happened here in Maine. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to pay special attention and tribute to Linda Conti, who's chief of our Consumer Protection Division, who spent hundreds of hours traveling to different states, and we opposed. The suit was filed here in Kennebec County, transferred to the business court. S&P removed it to federal court. S&P then got it combined with other lawsuits across the country in the Southern District of New York federal court. This woman single-handedly argued strenuously to remove the case back, remand the case back to state court. She was successful in that effort, and that gave us more leverage to negotiate the terms of this settlement. It was a major move and I'm so proud of her legal work, and I'm very proud of the Office of the Attorney General, who apply the rule of law every day, day in and day out, in transacting this kind of business. We are in court every day, and this woman is out there to protect the consumers, and has done so in magnificent fashion in this particular case, bringing home to Maine $21.5 million in settlement funds on behalf of the people of Maine, and consumers, consumer protection, and education. So I want to thank her personally and publicly for that effort.
Thank you, Julie.
Do you have anything to add? Now she's shy. She's going to get those on her front of the press. Oh, true.
You get a percentage. My question is,
Well, how much does MBBN need now?
Right now? Or now that we know?
why would there never be criminal charges? I mean, if somebody who lost their house might say, if they were doing this, somebody should have gone to jail.
Well, that's a good question. The matter was brought civilly because of the burden of proof. The Unfair Trade Practices Act is a civil statute. We're not alleging theft, we're alleging fraud, defrauding in a civil sense. There's a higher burden of proof, and I think the parties, the Attorneys General and the U.S. Attorney General felt that the criminal level of proof was not necessarily there. So, this was a group decision, a team effort. And you also can't, the penalty here is not a restitution penalty or technically a fine. It's disgorgement of the profits they received. And so that's a civil penalty too. You wouldn't necessarily get that in a criminal proceeding.
Janet, could you conceivably use any part of this settlement to enlarge or expand the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's Office?
To the extent the Consumer Protection Division helps homeowners, for instance, in fighting foreclosure efforts, we will certainly try to direct some of the money towards that.
I mean, for personnel, could we possibly see a couple of new AGs added to the...
That would be a budget item, and they would have to go through the process. I can't just create positions. I could certainly help allocate some money towards that effort, and that would be one of the intentions of this money.
For families who were foreclosed on in 2008 and beyond that, will they get any specific help there, or will you be helping the money be used more for families to prevent future foreclosures? How will that be?
Thank you. Some of both, actually. We have, and as you know, I worked for 6 months on a foreclosure relief effort and proposed legislation to the legislature last year, which got passed and enacted and signed by the governor, to streamline the foreclosure process. It would be our intent to beef up the efforts of foreclosure housing counselors and the advocacy groups. Pine Tree Legal does an excellent job with a small cadre of lawyers who appear in court to advocate for homeowners. The federal government has pumped billions of dollars, HAMP and other funds, to allow the banks, local banks and national banks, to provide homeowner relief. We are anxious to pursue that, to help beef up the efforts on behalf of homeowners. Not in the sense of direct payments, here's money to pay your mortgage, but here's money to help you advocate for yourself and help achieve a result that will allow you to keep your home.
What kind of message is this send to entities like S&P that you know?
Hopefully it tells them not to lie, not to be disingenuous about why they're giving any particular product a certain rating, particularly a AAA rating. You should note that in 2014, it's in the press release, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission did beef up their standards and make them more enforceable regarding credit agencies, addressing conflicts of interest, addressing protections of integrity and transparency in these kinds of procedures. So there's that going on too. It just took effect last year. And we will be monitoring, some of the terms of this settlement are that the AGs across the country, 20 of us who took part in this, will be monitoring S&P's actions. And if there are any questions about anything that they're doing or rating, we have the right to demand information on the spot and continue to hold their feet to the fire.
Is there a similar action against other credit rating agencies like Moody's?
There is in some states.
Here?
We can't comment on the other rating agencies.
Does that mean you just sort of commented on that?
No, we did not. There have been inquiries about other agencies, and I know that some other states have taken some action against Moody's, but we have felt all along that S&P was the major player here, and they particularly promoted investments in residential mortgage-backed securities, which really contributed to the downfall of the housing market in 2008, and that's why they're targeted here. Yes, sir.
Did you say specifically the families who were foreclosed on, will they be getting any of this, anything from this, or is it too late for that?
And they've already vacated their homes.
They lost their homes maybe in 2008.
There may be some way to form, to make some relief, give some relief to them, but I'm not sure that the primary effort will be to avoid foreclosure or help those people who are threatened with foreclosure or in foreclosure now. Some people have walked away from their homes because they've lost their jobs or they've moved out of state. So it would be difficult to turn back the clock or remedy that unfortunate situation. But you know that many homeowners, particularly in southern Maine, saw the housing values go up and then crash. And that was just a phenomenon that we still have not recovered from. And people have not recovered their jobs or their financial security so as to refinance a home.
Janet, it sounds like a lot of how this money is going to be used is still sort of being worked out. What's the process for deciding that?
Well, the settlement agreement restricts somewhat what we can do with it. I can't just write a check to the state, things of that sort. But its primary purpose is to remediate the effects of the 2008 crisis. That would include specifically helping with foreclosure relief and consumer education and protection in particular.
But is that a decision in exactly what that looks like? Is that left to the legislature, to you, to the governor?
I'll be talking to leadership and the administration about good uses for the money along those lines.
And you said it is one lump sum payment.
It will be one lump sum payment. It should not just go into the black hole, And the language in the court decree says it shall be used to supplement but not supplant existing programs. That's sort of typical.
You know what the feds are doing with their money?
Lord, I wish I knew. I wish I had a piece of that. Well, I do have a piece of it, but not just. Yeah.
Was the lawsuit originally for $5 billion?
We did not put a specific amount. I don't think we put a demand at the end of the lawsuit for a specific amount. No, because part of the discovery, negotiating, litigating process was to figure out how much they made out of this process. Not a reliance factor, not what did the investors lose, but how much did S&P make out, as a result of the fees that they were paid, their increased profits, and all those things. It was a very complicated discovery litigation process.
Is the amount they're paying all of the profit that they made?
Well, good question. It's basically an estimate of the
basically all the cash they have right now.
Well, there were some hot and heavy negotiations in Washington. If you read the Wall Street Journal,
No,
it's not an exact amount. It's an estimate, and it was obviously hotly negotiated. If you read the Wall Street Journal, you know that the S&P wanted to keep it under $1 billion, and the federal government was going for $1.5 billion, and $1 billion here, $1 billion there. After all, you're talking about real money.
Are you satisfied with this resolution, considering how far-reaching the crisis was?
I am satisfied with the resolution. There's an element of compromise in every settlement, but it's in the best interest of the people of Maine and the people of the other 19 states of the District of Columbia to resolve this and to put into place the supervision that is part of the settlement agreement that we might not get as a result of an end result to litigation if we would go to trial.
Have you spoken over the years with anyone specifically who has been impacted, who may have lost their home because of this?
Well, in doing the foreclosure analysis, the review that I did for 6 months, a year and a half ago, certainly we had public meetings and hearings, and we spoke to people who are victims of the foreclosure crisis, and we spoke to attorneys for banks, community banks and big banks, to try to negotiate things with them. I spoke with homeowners and Pine Tree Assistance lawyers and the group of lawyers who volunteered to do foreclosure advocacy, and I spoke with housing counselors and the credit unions, the whole panoply of players in the foreclosure process.
How was the 21 million figure figured out for Maine, and was the amount given to the states, the 19 states, divided equally, or how did that work?
More or less equally. It's a
was divided
Average.
equally. It was divided equally among the 19 or 20 participating states, with a couple of states getting a bump up for having put in extra work or spent extra money on things like expert witnesses and stuff like that at the get-go,
So it wasn't on a matter of number of people involved, so much as just division between the states?
It was unusual in that there was not divided based on population,
Right.
like most of our settlements. It was based on 1/20th
Yeah.
is what we got.
So we made up the same as some states that have 3 times the population we have, so it's a good thing.
Except, I mean, there are
California.
nuances. California has a slightly different situation, and so they're like a country unto themselves.
Yeah.
California got
Retirement
more
system that was,
Well,
because of the nature of their claims. The nature of their claims are a bit different.
Okay.
We good?
Thank you very
I'm
much.
very pleased that we were able to achieve this result. Again, it is the largest single payment settlement in the history of Maine. The only larger settlement would be the tobacco settlement, which is ongoing.
Right.
But for a one-payment, one-time thing, this is I think it's a terrific result. I'm very pleased with people of Maine. Very proud of my office.
Thank you.